Okay, let's get started on chapter 15. Before I start, if anybody has any questions about 13 and 14, I'll entertain those as well. Okay, we've got most of the people here. I still see a couple that are missing. But we're going to go ahead and get started. I'm going to share the video screen with you. And I've got two PowerPoints that are available for us. There's actually three. One's interactive, one's just exhibits. The exhibits pretty much, they focus solely on the graph and the map. They're more quantitative than qualitative. We've also got the whiteboard available. And here's the interactive. And I brought this up so we can look at what the objectives of this chapter are. They are about why they arise. Why is MR less than MP for a monopolist? How do monopolies choose their P and Q? How do monopolies affect society and their well-being? What can government do about monopolies? And what is price discrimination? When we look at price discrimination by a monopoly, it's quite a bit different than what you would think. Yeah, like at a local gas station, they'll charge X about for a Coke to blonde-haired people and a different price for red-haired people. This is a little deeper than that as far as going with monopolies. It's not as much selecting an individual or a characteristic as it is a community as a whole or a population as a whole. So these are the things we're going to talk about in chapter 15. When you're looking at a monopoly, it's usually dealing with one firm or that dominates a large percentage of the marketplace. When we look at monopolies, Alan Greenspan was the head of the Federal Reserve for a decade and a half. And he was asked back in the 90s if Microsoft was a monopoly and they monopolized the home PC operating system. And he said, yes. So what? If you go back to some of the original antitrust laws that were created and some of the cases that evolved over the history of monopolies and the government controlling monopolies, one of the most important cases was against Alcoa aluminum, because they controlled around 85% of the marketplace. And just because of that percentage, government officials felt that they were a monopoly and it impeded anybody else from getting into the marketplace just because of the scale of their operation. The justices, the courts stated you can have market share. You can dominate a large percentage of the market. But you not only have to physically be a monopoly, but you have to act like a monopoly. So when you go buying all the supply chains or all the retail outlets or all the manufacturing equipment, or you underprice your competitor for the sole purpose of taking them out of business, or you create barriers that impede people from getting into the same businesses that you're in, then you're acting like a monopoly. It wasn't long after Greenspan's little interview that Microsoft came out with Internet Explorer. And with Internet Explorer, Microsoft changed from being just physically a size of monopoly to acting like a monopoly. Because they built Internet Explorer as it could be the only default browser on Microsoft operating system. It didn't mean you couldn't go get others, but you could not. Microsoft Internet Explorer was going to be the default. They told the computer manufacturers, if you do not install Internet Explorer, we will not sell you Microsoft. So now they're linking two products together and forcing companies that previously just bought their system and installed it on their devices, forcing them to make a decision. And there was only one option. If you were in a IBM PC system, or you were manufacturing those type systems, you had no choice. One, you probably started out with Microsoft DOS and the first Windows program, and then in the 95 and to where we're at today. So not only do you have to physically be a monopoly, you have to act like one. A good example now is Campbell Soup Company. They control 85% of the marketplace for canned soups. But they don't act like a monopoly. They don't go into the grocery stores and say, if you want to sell ours, you can't sell theirs. They don't do that. They put their product out there, and they can pay for premium locations on the aisles. We're at the end of the aisle where you see it when you're either entering the aisle or leaving the aisle. So they're playing fair. That's the reason the courts have not gone after them. Now we're looking at Facebook, Google, Amazon. They're getting into a lot of different markets and controlling a lot of them as well. That could be a problem for them. Three barriers to entry: single firms own the key resource, the water or De Beers, the diamond broker. They control the large majority, over 90% of the diamonds that are sold globally. Russia has a large surplus of diamonds. So they're in agreement with De Beers and maintain the pricing of the diamonds. If they flooded the markets, the price would go down. So they use quantity to control price. That's how monopoly works. You use quantity to control price. Now, the government gives them the right to produce goods. They have patent and copyright laws that protect them. So if you come up with a new, latest and greatest device, somebody else can't just take it and build it. So you do have exclusive ability to produce a good or a service and be protected. But over time, there will be competition. If there's a profit in it, somebody else will make it. You may have to come up with a new way to do it, or modify the device, or if your challenge is just buy one of the products, reverse engineer it, and build your own. Now we have a natural monopoly and we have a pure monopoly. A natural monopoly is a situation where, like Microsoft, if you go back and look at the economies of scale. I'll get my draw pad over here. If we look at the economies of scale, this is a long run average cost curve. We can divide it in three parts: economies of scale, diseconomies of scale, and constant return of scale. Microsoft has acquired their economies of scale. So they're producing somewhere along this line right here. And they acquired those economies of scale based on the consumer demanding their product. When you went to buy a computer, you really had two, well, you had three. When you look at the operating systems, you could look at the Apple or the Mac systems. You could look at the Microsoft systems or Linux. Linux was free of charge. It's a powerful system, but it's not as user friendly as Microsoft or even Apple. But by acquiring those economies of scale, anybody else that entered this marketplace, they're going to be entering a point where every additional unit they produce, they're either going to get zero or negative responses. Because if we go all the way over to this other side, as we move from this point over, we start at the point where for each additional unit we produce, our costs go up. And that's not what we want to see. We don't want to be in a situation like that. The only way that Microsoft is going to be knocked off their pedestal is the dominant operating system in home PCs is for somebody to come up with a better product that'll work on the same platform and be more user friendly or functional than Microsoft. Somebody's going to come up with a better way. It's like coming up with the better mousetrap. Eventually that's going to happen. Now the monopolies have the market power. They are price makers. Remember that perfectly competitive firms were price takers. Monopolies are price makers. And it's very difficult for anyone else to enter the marketplace. So either because of scale or because of regulation or whatever, it's a difficult place to get into. Now, for a natural monopoly, it's just economies of scale. You as consumers gave them that right or that privilege to be the dominant supplier. Now, when we look at resources and controlled resources, if you look at De Beers, the majority of all the diamonds in the world go through De Beers for sale. And if you are a buyer of diamonds and you go into De Beers, you give them a general idea of what you want. They come in the room with you with a box, and they open the box and allow you to take the diamonds out and look at them. And they'll give you the price. Now, there's not much negotiation going on unless you see a flaw or something that was not seen through De Beers. If you argue with them, you will not be invited to come back. That is how a monopoly works. You control quantity to determine price. OPEC. Now, their power that they had for many decades has been dwindling because we can produce our own gasoline and oil. In the U.S., we're not as dependent as we used to be on their products. In the past, if they wanted the price to go up, they got with all their partners in the oil producing and exporting countries, and they said, okay, we're going to turn the spigot down a little bit. Instead of supplying 20 million barrels of oil a day, we're going to supply 15. Immediately when they do that, the price of oil goes up. It's basic supply and demand. Because if there's a demand for 18 or 19 million barrels of oil a day and they're producing only 15 or 16 million barrels, we're going to have to start bidding those prices up to get control of the oil. Now we're seeing prices under 40. I think I looked at it this morning, it's down $1 and something. But the market's down over 500 this morning. Mostly because of the fear of what's going on in Europe. They're looking at starting to lock down again. If they do that, their demand for gasoline will go down, the oil supplies will go up, and the oil reserves will go up, and the price will go down. The natural monopoly, like I said, they're taking the economies of scales. And it makes it difficult for anyone else to come in and compete. Microsoft didn't have to do a thing, or they don't have to do a thing. You don't see Microsoft advertising on TV to get you to buy their product. If you ever see Microsoft advertising, it's based on goodwill. They want to move you to another position, or if there's been bad news about some Microsoft employees, they're going to want to try to repair the image or the brand. Now, like we were talking about with the economies of scale, this is the average total cost curve. If we had a whole series of these, then we would be looking at long run average cost. But they're just looking at a small community. They're going to look at not necessarily the lowest average total cost. They're going to look at where they can make the most profit. Now they're doing the comparison here as we go through each of these chapters, the next couple of chapters with monopolistic competition and oligopolies. They're going to give us these descriptors of the previous markets. There's the competitive firm. We saw that in chapter 14, monopoly 15. I think monopolistic competition is 16, 17 is oligopolies. They're going to remind us that competitive firm, the marginal revenue is perfectly elastic. Because there are some buyers and sellers, they don't believe they have any control of pricing. Now, the actual market, there's clearly defined supply and demand. But because there's so many buyers and sellers, they don't believe they have that control. So the demand curve will be perfectly elastic as perceived by the seller, and the supply curve will be perfectly elastic as seen by the buyer. The monopoly's demand curve is pretty much like a standard demand curve. Well, that's what it is. Because when we look at this demand curve is defined by the consumer, you and me. And now we have some people that are only going to buy if the price is here. But we also have individuals that are willing to pay this price up here. Now, if the price goes up to that P2, the buyers at P1 are not even going to participate in the marketplace. They're done. Now, if there's price discrimination, we can say as a business, okay, those that are willing to pay, let's say, $1,000, $100. What we'll do is the people willing to pay $1,000, we'll charge them $1,000, and ones that are willing to pay $100, we'll charge them $100. That is price discrimination. Now, it wouldn't be good business practice because sooner or later the people up here are going to figure out all they have to do is go to this newer location and receive it. And now with the internet, they don't even have to travel to the other city. They can contact a friend or send a broker down there and buy a bunch of units and bring them back. Or just have them shipped. This is the market monopolist demand curve. and it tells them what you're willing to pay for the product. We already know how to calculate total revenue and average revenue and marginal revenue. As we see here, this is different from the perfectly competitive firm, because in the perfectly competitive firm, I gave you the price. And all you did was go price times quantity all the way down. Here we see a situation where the quantity is 0, the price is 60. And we're moving from left to right on the demand curve, because we're going to start at Q of 0 and 60. At 1 is 55, 2 is 53, and 45, 4 40. We can do all the calculations and we can find our total revenue. We can calculate our average revenue. 2 times 50 would be 100. 100 divided by 2 would be 50. Very simple, easy math. So all we're looking at here, we got our total revenue, which is P times Q. This is total revenue. How about Q? This is a change in total revenue divided by the change in Q. So remember, when we do this, 0 and 60 can't divide by 60. So this is undefined. Total revenue here will be 0. Marginal revenue, well, here 1 is 55, so the total revenue is 55. Average revenue is 55. So if we're doing the math, we're looking at the change in total revenue with the change in Q. Change in Q is 1. Change in total revenue is 55, so the marginal revenue for that first unit is $55. And we will continue all the way down. Because you have to remember that this goes with 1 for the first interval. We don't get $55 in revenue from the 0 unit. We get it for the first unit. So when you graph it, if you ever have to graph it, make sure you start the marginal revenue curve at 1, not at 0, not at 0.5. Okay? Here they've done all the math for us, and we can see something we didn't see before with a perfectly competitive firm. We're seeing negative numbers. With these negative numbers, we see the downward movement of the marginal revenue curve, and then it goes negative. So what has happened after this point, somewhere in here, it goes from positive to negative. That line crosses into the negative. And once it goes negative, it's not coming back. So if you're ever graphing it, you don't, unless somebody tells you to graph the negatives, just cross the x-axis and then show that it has passed through, and that's all you need to do. That's what they have done here. They got 55, and they actually went to 1/2. So they're going in between this. So they're going to say at 1.5, 2.5, 3.5, 4.5. The more intervals you have, the tighter this will be. We can see this marginal revenue curve is downward sloping. The last response is, what is that? Well, they've got the negatives as well. You don't have to worry about it. There's nothing happening down here that we are interested in. All I need to do is see this curve go across the x-axis. Now they went into halves. Some textbooks don't go in halves, they just go to the first unit. This book is now going to halves. And that's what you need to do. It does make it a little more difficult for scaling. But if you've got graph paper, it'll be fairly simple. And plus, if you truly understand what's going on, you don't even really have to see the graph, because the point we're looking for is where marginal cost is equal to marginal revenue. Here, all we see is the demand curve and the marginal revenue curve. The marginal revenue curve is 2 times the slope of the demand curve. Let's see. Marginal revenue is less than price. Yes, all the way down. Okay. Here's what we're looking for. You have a demand curve, clearly defined. It's a full size so we can see it. So we have a clearly defined demand curve and marginal revenue curve. Marginal revenue is 2 times the slope. Then we have the demand curve. Marginal cost curve. Went the wrong way. The point we're looking for is where MR is equal to MC. Where MR is equal to MC, that's where we maximize our profits. Now, what happens is we go from where MR is equal to MC, we go down to the quantity axis. That tells us the quantity that will be produced. Remember, the marginal cost curve is very similar to the, if not equal to the supply curve, because they're not going to produce at a point where they're below marginal cost. Their average total cost or revenues are below marginal cost. So as you see, marginal cost cross marginal revenue and the demand curve. That's where it's going to stop, because at this point where marginal cost is equal to marginal revenue, that's where we're going to want to produce, right here. So we're going to define the quantity, we'll go down to Q, then we'll come all the way back up, and then we're going to find the demand curve. The demand curve is defined by you and me. So we're telling them how much we're willing to pay, and that's what they're going to charge us. That's the price. Now to determine profitability, we need to go see the ATC curve, which is our average total cost per unit. And we can clearly see that that vertical line goes through it right here. And we can move to the cost revenue axes. We can see that our price, let's say the price is 5 and the cost is 3. And let's say this is 10. To determine our profit per unit is subtract price and ATC, which would be $2. That's our profit per unit. To determine our total profit, we've got it here. So 5 minus 3 is 2. The 2 times 10 equals 20. All we're looking at is that box to see what is included within this area. We know our average total cost. We can do that through math calculations. That'd be our fixed cost plus variable cost. Will give us total cost, and it'd be total cost divided by quantity. Oh, there's another area that I think is important. I think they show it to us a little more later. This area in here. If we were looking at a monopoly, or let's say a perfectly competitive firm, we would be looking for the point where MC which is basically the supply curve crosses demand curve. That would be our equilibrium. This is where it should be. When the government sues a monopoly, this is the amount of money they intend to recover. Because the government says if there had been competition, this is what the price would have been. The price would have been this, and the quantity would have been higher. So it brought the price down and the quantity up. This is considered the deadweight loss. And some books refer to it as the welfare cost of a monopoly. Either one is acceptable. I think this book likes the deadweight loss versus the welfare cost. Either way, this market is not working efficiently. It is a market failure because there are people that want more, and there's other people that want to get in the market and sell. They're taking advantage because they are the only game in town. And that's basically what they're talking about here. When we look at a monopoly, Q and P, they're determined by where MR and MC intersect. Then you go up to demand curve and down to quantity. This is what we see here. This is a situation with a patent. Our marginal cost is here. There's a demand for the product, marginal revenue. The more lethal and widespread the disease is, the steeper the demand curve will be. We're looking at COVID right now. When a vaccine comes out, that curve, that demand curve is going to be just about perfectly elastic. Now, the government has already pre-purchased 100 and some million vials of the vaccine. So as soon as one of them is cleared and approved, proven to be effective, the government's going to purchase, or they've already purchased those units. Those units will be delivered and given to the consumers, which would be us, the citizens. I heard something, maybe some logistics problems, because one of them has to be stored at -91 degrees. The military will be doing the distribution. So they've got if that's what's required, I'm sure they're already working on it. Okay. The same thing here. This will be the deadweight loss. Here's the deadweight loss identified here. Don't try to make these things more difficult than they are. If you look over here and you see all the letters and numbers and everything else, it's P and Q. It's marginal, it's average. We can have all these different labels all over the paper. And it looks confusing to some, but E is price, Q is quantity, M is marginal. Now, if this was a perfectly competitive firm, this would be the equilibrium. It'd be our quantity and our price. Now let's say it's C, competitive. M is the monopoly. There's our deadweight loss. Now, on the other PowerPoint, let me bring it up real quick. One of the exhibits. This one just shows you the graphs and so forth. And these are things we've already seen. Here we have a different curve. It shows the same thing. We're looking for the point where marginal cost is equal to marginal revenue. There's B, that'll represent our price. This will be the price. But look at where the ATC crosses. It's here. So everything in here is going to be profit. They're going to charge you whatever you're willing to pay. That's how monopoly works. This will be deadweight loss. If they're showing a profit, this should be a deadweight loss. If it's a competitive firm, the pricing will be here. A monopoly, they drive marginal revenue curve from the demand curve. And they're looking for the quantity where MR is equal to MC. You'll find that all of the different all the markets are looking for the same thing when they're looking for the optimum level of production. They're looking for the point where marginal cost is equal to marginal revenue. Perfectly competitive, marginal revenue is going to equal price. It'll be perfectly elastic. Monopoly is 2 times the slope of the marginal revenue is 2 times the slope of the demand curve. You see the same thing in monopolistic competition. One thing with them is their demand curves are not as steep as what you see with a monopoly. Because even with monopolistic competition, as we'll see next on Wednesday, they think they're in their own little world, but they're really not. If you go to exit 97, there's what, 7, 8, 9 restaurants right in that area. They're all serving food. You got hamburgers. There's multiple places selling hamburgers. There's multiple places selling chicken. In their mind, they're all different. But they are competitors. And they can overprice point that you will go to the competitors. Now, if you're dealing with a monopoly, there's no one for you to run to. Now, you can just choose not to consume. That's okay. It's not going to force them to sell or change their pricing. Now, with the drugs, there's demand and competitive quantity. That's where the market wants it to be. That's where the price will be after the market or the patent expires. You'll see all the generics come in, and they'll redefine the marketplace, and the quantity will increase, and taking some of that monopolistic power from the drug companies. Now, this kind of, I think it's something we could have discussed earlier when we talked about price controls and market failures. We show the marginal cost curve, which is basically the supply curve, and the demand curve, which is what we as consumers say the value is. Now, if the cost of monopolists is low, is here, it's going to be value to the consumer. Because this buyer up here is going to be able to buy at a lower price. Now, over here, this is a cost to the monopolist and value to consumer. So they're going to want to control their cost on this side. Because if they go beyond that equilibrium point, we can see the cost of monopoly goes up while the value to consumers goes down. Because if they flood the market with the product, it's not worth as much anymore. Next one's showing the deadweight loss, very simple. Now this one is showing price discrimination by a monopoly. We're looking at a monopoly. Normally we're going to set the price for MC equals MR, which will be right here. Now what's happening, we have the deadweight loss, we have consumer surplus. There's people that want it that can't get it. They can probably get it if they pay a higher price. This is the profit to the monopoly. The pricing should be down in this area here. But if we look at price discrimination by a monopoly, what they will do is all of this is fair game. With them considering the marginal cost curve to be the supply curve, they're going to supply X amount and then charge you whatever you're willing to pay. If they're selling new pickup, a Hummer pickup, I've seen the new electric Hummers, amazing vehicles. They're also about $112,000. The market, there's not that big a market in Florida. I guarantee the market's much larger in California. If they were going to use price discrimination, if there was one company making that vehicle and nobody else had anything to compete with it, they're basically a monopoly. So if they wanted to price discriminate, they would charge the people in LA, whatever number this may be, maybe charge them $300,000. But in 4 Oaks, I'm not willing to pay that much. I'll pay $150,000. If they were practicing price discrimination, both of us would get it individuals. The person in LA would get it for $300, and I'd get it for $150. The monopoly is still making a profit. Because anytime the demand is greater than market cost, they're making a profit. Now we don't see average total cost. That would be clearly defining where the profit is or where it is not. But this is price discrimination by a monopoly. Like I said before, if it's an item like this, and now with the internet and everything else, within a day of this type of practice going on, the person in LA is going to know that they just bought theirs. They paid $300,000 for it, and somebody in 4 Oaks, North Carolina, paid $150,000 for the same vehicle. They're not going to be happy, and the next consumer is going to say, hire a driver or have a truck pick up a few Hummers for them in 4 Oaks. Then the monopoly starts losing money. So with the internet age and everything else, if they got the power, they're going to use the quantity to determine price. This doesn't work as well when there's free information moving back and forth. It doesn't matter if it's a Hummer or a computer chip. It could be the latest and greatest Intel product. It's 10 times better than the existing. They charge $1,000 in LA and $100 in 4 Oaks. Eventually, very soon, the people in California will realize all they have to do is order them from North Carolina, and even with the shipping, it's still cheaper to buy them in 4 Oaks than it is to buy them in California. So most of the monopolies can be operating on this principle here with a single price. Now, in this situation, they eliminated the demand curve, which is okay. But where they got the demand curve, they haven't got a marginal revenue curve, which will be downward sloping here. In this case, if you look at the average total cost curve, the place that they have their least loss would be in this area right here. Now, monopoly don't like to lose money, and they're not going to provide a product to the market if you're not willing to pay the price for it. So we could see a situation uh, as being a monopoly. And we'd have a clearly defined demand curve. Marginal revenue curve, which is 2 times the slope of the demand curve. We could have a marginal cost curve. Something like this. This would determine the quantity and the price. This point downward is a quantity. Here's our price. So anything in here would be profit. Let's say I put, here's, we'll put a couple of average cost curves in here. AC1, AC2, and AC3. In this case, if the price is equal to average total cost, this is zero profit. That's because P is equal to ATC. Now, if we look at the one above it, this goes completely off the chart. This will be the ATC. So all of this area would be a loss to a monopoly. So when we're looking at all the things going on with a monopoly, we can establish the demand curve as P and Q. Marginal revenue curve is the change in total revenue over change in quantity. Marginal cost is the change in total cost over the change in quantity. We've got all these formulas. We've got the average total cost curves too. And if you see me write AC and ATC are the same thing. It's just the way I was taught and I've done it for way too long. The book uses ATC as average total cost. But in a situation with ATC1, we have profits. ATC2, we're not making any money. And at 3, we don't even need to be in business. We need to make something else where the market price is greater than the cost to produce the product, the average cost to produce the product. Any questions on that? Okay. So when we see this, we can see where it's defining the production here. We don't have the marginal revenue curve, because if we had a marginal revenue curve on this one, it would be coming down here. And at this point, even if the price is there, that's some very poor math skill, drawing skills. Look at the loss that will be incurred. It will be this entire area versus from here to here. One of the only reasons you would see a monopoly that would be willing to produce a product at a loss, let's say a product one, let's say I develop a new gaming system. It'll play every game for every platform. But It also has capability much greater than anything that's been produced in the marketplace. It's actually incorporating some artificial intelligence, to the next level, where it's like you're playing against a real person that reacts to everything you do. This new system, I'm the only one that has I got a patent for it. It's nothing like anything that's ever been out there. So with that patent, I've got a box that cost me about $150 to produce. That's my average total cost to produce a box. But the games, that's a whole different ballgame. When I produce the games, that's where the money's at. I gotta have an average total cost, including the development of about 1,000,000 units. It could be $100 be my cost. But I'm going to charge you whatever you're willing to pay. If you're willing to pay $500 for it, guess what? You're going to pay $500. If you're willing to pay $200, you're going to pay $500. So I'm going to go with a single price, and I'm going to charge you whatever you're willing to pay. But I can't sell you the games until you buy the machine. So I may sell the machine at near the cost. I may have some promotional giveaways. Anything to get that machine in your household. Because once I have that machine in the household, you don't need anything else. Because every game you've ever bought, you can input it into this machine. That's if I were Monopoly and I had control of both of those components, new games and the system, I know if you go buy a game, you can't use it unless you buy a box. It's like at a movie theater. I'm not going to try to raise the prices on the movie tickets. I want to get you in that door. Once you're in that door, that's when you take that big inhale all that buttered popcorn and you smell all this stuff, and you have displays that have all the candies and chocolates. You have half-gallon buckets of popcorn. That's where I make my bread and butter. That's my money. I'd rather sell the ticket at cost to get you in the door just so you can consume the other products. Here is another chart that you're going to see in every one of the in chapter 16 and 17. When we get to 17, that's where we're dealing with oligopolies. We'll be looking at game theory and the prisoner's dilemma. But there's going to be a chart just like this, or a table, at the end of chapter 17, I believe, that has everything on it. In chapter 16, 15, we're 15 now. 14, we just saw a table with this information. Now we have a monopoly on here, and we have monopolistic competition, and then we're going to have the oligopolies beside it. But notice, both objectives are the same: maximize profit. If you're going in business and you're not intending to make a profit, you need to go and file paperwork and become a non-profit, or make a bunch of money doing something else and just give stuff away. In both of these, we see similarities here, and that's about where they disappear. The number of firms, many to one. Marginal revenue is equal to price. The monopoly marginal revenue is less than price. produces welfare, maximizing the level of outputs. Perfect competition, they produce everything they perceive you need. And if there's not enough, they'll build another store, or they'll add another gas station, or they'll build another hotel. Entry in the long run, yes. Easy entry and exit. In a monopoly, the answer is no. And when we look at producing the welfare maximizing levels, let's go back to OPEC. They're there to make money. That's what they want to do. I don't know what their exact cost is now to get their product out of the ground. They have easy access to the oil. And the last time I heard it was around $2 a barrel for them to get it out of the ground. And when it was going for $100 and $120 a barrel, that's big money. That's big profits. Now, when you're looking at 30 or $40 a barrel, the profits are not quite as great. See, still, it takes them two to get out of the ground, but they still have to deliver it. And transportation costs and all that is probably going to bring it up to the $20 range. But in the past, if they wanted to increase their profits, slow everybody down, they could just stop shipping oil. During the oil embargo in the late 70s, early 80s, there were tanker ships just doing circles out in the middle of the Atlantic, Pacific. They weren't going back to their port where they left, and they weren't going to go deliver the oil. They just sat there and went circles. So that's not generating the greatest welfare. And earn economic profits in the long run, a perfectly competitive firm. We saw the situation with concepts of zero profit in a perfectly competitive market. Because if there is a profit, you'll have more people enter the marketplace, and when they enter the marketplace, the supply goes, the price goes down, and it'll continue until P is equal to ATC. And when that happens, you're at zero. And it's zero as a market. So the ones that have all the capital set back and have managed their money and assets properly, they will survive. The ones that do not properly manage their monies and their operations will either go away or start losing a boatload of money. Sometimes you have to know when to get out. It's like in a poker game. You got to know when to fold. If you've been in business and you've been losing money for a year and everybody else around you is making money, you need to find something else to do. Or find out why they like them and not you. And is price discrimination possible in a perfectly competitive firm? They say no. Because there's so many alternatives for suppliers and for buyers. In a monopoly, it's absolutely yes. Any questions about monopoly?
No, sir.
None at all. How many of you have done the homework for 15? Any of you?